So as you all can see, we've got a fantastic panel here. You heard Rich ask several questions about BYOD, about security, about cloud. You heard Telefonica talk about a lot of these same topics. Well, what we've put together is a fantastic collection of experts from some of the foremost vendors and analysts in the community to talk about cloud computing, the future of cloud, and how some of the different topics that everybody's been talking about here this week already are impacted by and how they impact cloud. First thing I'd like to do is have each of our panelists give a quick introduction, let you know who they are, and then we'll get started. Lisa?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Pierce. I'm with Gartner. I'm the, sorry, I'll do it again. Hi, I'm Lisa Pierce. I'm the Managing Vice President of Gartner's research practice around unified communications, network systems, and services.
Hi, I'm Mike McCarthy, and I'm Vice President of Cloud Computing for IBM Global Technology Services.
Hi, I'm Peter Eulander. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Citrix, responsible for our virtualization and cloud computing practice.
My name is Skip Chilcott, and I run the mid-market business in the U.S. for Microsoft Unified Communications.
I'm Kiran Bellari. I'm Director of Marketing for HP Public Cloud Services, and we have 3 offerings, private, managed, and public cloud, so I'm responsible for the public cloud segment.
And I am Roberto de la Mora. My team runs Worldwide Unified Communications Marketing for Cisco.
Well, thank you. Like I said, we've got a fantastic panel, some of the foremost names in the industry. We want to talk about cloud computing, but before we can do that, I think we need to define not only what we mean by cloud computing, but more importantly, what we mean by the cloud computing opportunity for the enterprise. And to get us started with that, I want to ask Lisa to kind of give us a little bit of an overview on where you think cloud computing has and presents the greatest opportunity for the enterprise community.
Well, we've got kind of an interesting assortment here. We've got some infrastructure as a service and vendors. We've got some UCaaS vendors who are going to be bundling the application with the infrastructure. There's a lot of ways you can go about looking at the cloud. We haven't talked about platform as a service at all, which I look as a great opportunity for service providers to support other types of IT vendors. What's really important when you are asking about cloud is to be very specific about what it is that you require and that you need. Regardless of the level of functionality of the cloud, let's talk about what all cloud services should provide at an absolute minimum. They should be highly scalable in near real time. They should be use metered billing, so usage-based billing. They should be highly automated to reduce costs and to reduce human error. And they should be highly elastic. Go from 0 to any number you pick. At a minimum, any cloud service you get should offer that functionality. If it doesn't, it's not a cloud service.
What about software as a service? When we're talking about infrastructure, platform as a service, software as a service is probably the one that everybody's most familiar with. It's certainly got the highest adoption rate so far. Where does that fall into the picture as far as the conversation?
Certainly cloud, and I want to get some of the other opinions up here, but certainly software as a service is very, very popular, especially for new applications that customers may be adopting or that parts of the business want to experiment with. Certainly, for instance, unified communications as a service, which is many applications, is an excellent example of that.
Mike, where does the greatest opportunity lie?
Well, there's really a spectrum of things you can do with cloud. I mean, you should mention software as a service. You'll hear people talk about platform as a service. Think of middleware. There's infrastructure as a service. So there's kind of a gamut, and certainly the software as a service has been the most widely adopted to date. I think, and the other elements of that are certainly coming on. Clients we see are I don't want to say all of them are experimenting, but we see kind of a typical model for how clients are adopting cloud, from looking at, especially in the infrastructure space, doing maybe less mission critical things, than as they prove out the technology, not only to themselves, but as an IT organization and you're serving lines of business, there can be some skepticism about cloud, so it's important to prove out the capability that it can provide. And so that's typically what we see with clients, is that migration from evaluation to proof of concepts to putting things in production. And so that gives you some general guidance on how you might approach these things.
Peter, what are you suggesting to your customers?
So one of the big things that we see at Citrix is this move inside of IT to move to an IT as a service model. And that actually takes into consideration all the different elements of what has been defined as cloud computing, but we take it from the vantage point of looking at the end user. So for example, software as a service, be it anywhere from CRM like Salesforce to a desktop as a service to unified communications or what have you. This is all focused on the end user, and one of the reasons why I think it's seen as more mature or broadly adopted is this was where a lot of these new services started, and it also impacts the largest group within an organization, right? The end users ultimately are what's going to drive the success and the growth within that platform. We step one layer down when we look at the platform as a service. That audience goes from the end users down to developers. These are developers that are looking to build either in-house apps, taking some of the custom apps that they may have been building for their SOA-based services, composite apps, et cetera. And platform as a service just becomes a next step for that. It's become a big opportunity, I think, for service providers in many ways, because many of these next-gen apps are actually being delivered through a public cloud environment. And then finally, and this is probably the closest to my heart, there's that element of the infrastructure as a service. And we see it come in two forms. There is the big public cloud that many small startups, businesses, developers are using just to gain access to IT resources. But in the enterprise, we're seeing it be a transformation of an operational model, ways to get higher efficiencies out of virtualized systems, ways to remove the pairs of hands that go between service request and service delivery. And the audience generally with regards to IT as a service really is focused in on generally the CIO, right? The IT directors and IT architects. I think the initial push happens in the line of business. But more and more the discussions over the last few years has actually started to merge back into the CIO, looking at ways to take advantage of the efficiencies, not just the cost efficiencies of cloud services, but actually the operational efficiencies of cloud services and delivering components and technologies out to their end users.
So I want to come back and touch on the idea of the different business units and the different end user groups right after we let Skip jump in as well.
Yeah, we also see software as a service. Obviously there are many offerings that Microsoft has in platform and infrastructure and software. Software as a service is probably the most widest adopted service and the fastest growing. I think, as Mike alluded to, you have those organizations that aren't willing to jump in 100%. But they're testing the waters in a lot of areas and finding the successes and the challenges. And as they find the success, it starts to grow and expand. And so the biggest one we see is email, which is the most obvious, I think, when it comes to adoption, and it's been around the longest. But as users become comfortable with that, and organizations become comfortable with the fact that that can be one of those services that can run partially in the cloud and on premise, and you can move over time and have a hybrid deployment if you want to. Is where we see most companies starting, and then they expand out from there. But I think the other key element is that it has to be done on the terms of the customer. It's not an all or nothing proposition. It can't be. So, doing it in such a way where you're comfortable moving pieces or parts or starting somewhere, doing pilots, getting comfortable with that, and then continuing to move it over time is at your own pace. You're in control of that on the speed in which you get comfortable. But we are seeing organizations accelerate the adoption in several different areas. So, that's kind of where I think most are starting. But I do think what you were just saying is that, users are driving a lot of the need. It's not necessarily the IT department bringing a new service to the users and say, here's something brand new. It's the existing things that people are using today on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And if they're able to do them on their own and not have to rely on IT to deliver it, we're starting to see more and more of that. So, users can sign up for things in the cloud, and that creates its own issues. And I think that's one of the challenges you were talking about.
So Kieran, Skip just talked about the idea of using the tools that you've got in existence, in essence, leveraging existing technology, existing infrastructure, existing investments. How critical is that to the evolution and to the continued adoption of cloud? How do you recommend enterprises go about that?
So we're seeing growth from both aspects, right? From enterprises deploying new workloads and new applications in the cloud, and also looking at extending or migrating the existing applications that are in the enterprise using existing tools. So I think it's important that we provide them a means to be able to leverage their existing investments, and also provide a seamless hybrid solution where they can either extend parts of the applications or migrate the full workloads to the cloud. And that could be in a variety of different formats, whether it's private or public or something in between. So we're seeing demand in terms of all those different flavors of workloads.
Roberto, are you on the same page there?
I think I am. Leveraging the current investments, at least from what we hear from our customers, is critical. You want a model that can build on what you have and get the best of both worlds, right? Hybrid models for a lot of customers are going to be the way to go, right? There are certainly some use cases and some industries, particular businesses, that can go all the way to the cloud, or they need to stay all the way on premises. But for most of the market, something in the middle, selecting which workloads are the best to get to the cloud will be the best answer.
Just to add some color to that, so we built an ecosystem of solution partners that service these different kind of models and different use cases. And we are seeing some of them using the cloud for development test purposes, where they want instant access to infrastructure that can spin up and spin down. We're also seeing demand where they want to migrate their workload. So we're seeing pretty much the gamut of different kinds of solutions being deployed.
So absolutely, scalability, instant up, instant down, a big part of why cloud has become so popular. One of the things that both Rich, Telefonica, and a few of you have already touched on is the question of security. When people are embarking on their virtualization strategies, whether it's to create efficiencies in-house or whether it's to support mobility initiatives or for other reasons, there's always going to be, there always has been, always will be, continue to be that important question of security. How do you address that, especially when it comes to making sure that your virtualization strategies are secure? Lisa?
A couple of things. For everyone who's looking at virtualization or cloud, only 50% are asking the question, how do I secure all those endpoints? That's pretty scary. But that's where we are today. And then the question is, well, what products, what functions should I look at? And it turns out that depending upon which security product you look at, they may or may not support a number of key functions that you need today. Can the security product look inside a containerized application? Can it operate inside a containerized application? Some can, many can't. Simple case in point.
One thing I would add on security is any of the infrastructure platform, even software as a service providers, will talk to you about the great security capabilities that they have built into their offering, whether it's physical security in their data centers, whether it's two-factor authentication, or you name it, all the capabilities that we can do. But what we typically find and what we advise our customers is Security is kind of got to be a partnership between the application owner and the infrastructure and middleware provider. So no matter what we can do as a provider, there's going to be things that you're going to have to do at the application layer to kind of complete the picture. So it really ends up being an important partnership to ensure the right level of security.
Peter, what are you doing to ensure that?
I mean, security is that's the hot topic, regardless of what you're talking about with regards to IT, delivering physical, virtual, cloud, what have you. It's the last mile with regards to the requirements. It's constantly showing up. And I think there's two sides to it. There's the security aspect, which, as you mentioned, the marriage between the application provider and the infrastructure provider, and to some extent, all the way out to the end user. There's also the compliance aspect, right? All of these things form decisions to be made by an enterprise, right? And it comes down to the risk profile. You don't necessarily put everything out in the public cloud. Why? Because while they've all addressed a number of security things, there's also a number of security risks that come along with that. So I think ultimately for the enterprise, recognizing that the same risk analysis that you do in deploying any type of application in your infrastructure, you want to apply to the cloud. And then really understand what are the deployment models that fit your specific need. Because at the end of the day, cloud isn't completely replacing everything you have. Cloud is just another tool within your IT arsenal.
One thing I would say about security is, obviously security is table stakes. This is not something that, as a provider, we can, cut corners on. So you can have every certification there is, you can compartmentalize data, you can secure it 10 ways from Sunday as a cloud service provider. What you can't do is change the culture of an organization. So security is a culture. And one of the examples I would give is, something we call data leakage, which is, email can be secure, system secure, authentication secure, but Joe down on the corner that sends an email with a credit card number in it outside the organization, is that a security breach? Well, if it's a customer list attached to an email that's it has a list of email addresses in it, that's a fairly substantial thing. And a lot of companies don't think about that aspect of security. So in a cloud service, we can secure it all, and we can give you a list of our certifications and build trust with customer that over time and earn that trust and that confidence. At the same time, it is a partnership and a culture shift for a lot of companies to get used to the fact that there's more than technical security. Email addresses and social security numbers are what's in the news. And we can protect that from leaking once it's in our hands. But in the user's hands, it's dangerous. And that's about the culture of security.
So, Roberto, with respect to security and trust in the cloud, do users trust the cloud?
I think for the most part they do. If anybody here has a public Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo Mail account, and they've been using that forever, and they're good, to use it for payment transactions on your own credit card, then you inherently trust that. The problem is when data that is not yours, that belongs to your company, is exposed. And beyond, building on what Lisa said about the scary thought of having all these devices, particularly now in the bring your own device age, right? Where you cannot, the employer cannot only say, because I gave you the device, then I do whatever I want to the device. Now the device is mine. Screw you, sorry, it's my device, right? I want to run your application on that. But how I secure the application, the content and the data that belongs to me as a company without priving on your personal data, that's a big challenge to solve, right? So those are the things that we're trying to solve. And as my colleague said, you can build the most secure cloud data center in the world. You can have the best practices on how you administer your data and your software. But if you don't educate your users and you don't have the policies in place, there is no security at all.
What about the concept of multi-vendor cloud, cloud interoperability? You've got many cloud vendors out there, different companies using all those different products. One of the things that a lot of them would love to see is to have absolute confidence that all of their different applications in different clouds with different cloud vendors are going to work nicely, play nicely together, if you will. What's it going to take to be able to do that? Mike?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no question about it. It's I don't think it's really a choice for a vendor to decide, viably whether they should participate in interoperability and standards and things like that. At least the clients I work with demand that we do that. They demand it for a couple of reasons. One is they want to have flexibility, either because they know if they invest in a service we provide and they decide for whatever reason a year from now, 5 years from now that they want to use another vendor, that they haven't wasted a lot of time. And, not surprisingly, a lot of vendors, or a lot of clients, have multi-vendor sourcing strategies. And they don't want to have to do two different things for two different vendors. So we view it as an absolute must to participate, strongly in standards-based, projects to ensure that we have that level of operability. It gives clients choice, and also from an ecosystem perspective, if you have a standard, ecosystem vendors, ISVs, et cetera, can develop capabilities that'll run anywhere, and that just extends the value that's available to our clients.
Kieran, how is HP addressing it?
Yeah, just to echo Mike's comments. So HP is an active contributor of, so we are a big believer in terms of open standards to drive cloud innovation and cloud adoption. So we are actually actively involved in the OpenStack standards bodies, as well as actively contributing code back to the standards. And our vision is essentially customers need this for a couple of reasons, at least 3 reasons. One is to be able to interoperate between different vendors' clouds. Secondly is to be able to provide portability of workloads, right? So being able to move workloads between private and public clouds. And then thirdly, also to foster innovation, because now that you have one set of standards that can talk to your infrastructure layer, you can essentially foster an ecosystem of solution partners that can work against the same standard and then provide ubiquity in terms of their solution offering across multiple clouds. So it benefits the customer in several ways.
Roberto, I saw you raise your hand over there.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that was said, but I was thinking that cloud or not cloud, I think this idea of trying to build the best of breed solution with 40 different vendors is quite difficult to execute, right? In an on-premises environment, in cloud complicates things even further, right? So my suggestion would be, if you want to have a mix of vendors to deploy your entire environment, pick a few that can deliver between them 80–90% of the things that you need, and be proactive and ask them about what is the relationship, right? If they have intentions, integrations, they have cross-support policies. We, for example, with many companies here like HP, IBM, and Citrix and others, we have those kind of policies where we support each other, right? We have policies, procedures, and escalations that can help for a customer to achieve success when something breaks, and believe me, something will, right? So, building probably a cloud solution based on just one vendor is going to be difficult. Choosing one provider may be easier. I mean, a cloud provider, but with different vendors. But pick the few that you think that can build, and make sure that they talk to each other and play nicely. Right.
Lisa, should all the vendors out there play nicely?
Yes, they should, but of course they don't. Now remember, one of my guys is the fellow who did the business case proving that multi-vendor is cheaper. So we have a particular position to stay on this. When you think about multi-vendor, it shouldn't be haphazard. It should be very well thought on, understanding what functionality might require me to standardize in a particular vendor and use proprietary solution. And so I might have spheres of different vendors, as you would, and then you would need, of course, open standards to interconnect those. Why? Because no vendor is good on every front as equally strong. We all know that to be true. Number 2, your business requirements. You have particular needs that one vendor may support right now and one may not. 3, I don't care what kind of cloud it is, it's moving at the speed of light, and so the decisions you make today You're going to, if let's say you put off making a decision about an infrastructure as a service provider for 6 months, and you say, oh, I'll just whip out my RFP that I issued 6 months ago and I'll look at that. No, you've got to start all over again because this business is moving that fast. So you absolutely positively want flexibility, but you want to do it in a very intelligent and informed fashion.
Yeah, if I could add to that, it kind of made me think, there's, we were talking before the session here with Eric, and he was asking, hey, do you guys think that the world's going to go to cloud completely? And I don't know anybody that thinks that, everything is going to be cloud a year from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I mean, the reality is if you look across the different types of applications that you are likely using, you're going to find that some of them make sense for cloud now. Some may make sense for cloud a couple of years as different capabilities mature. Some will never make sense for cloud. You will always have applications that will never make sense for cloud. So what we find is there are approaches you can take for evaluating what makes sense for cloud. You start looking at things like what your application and infrastructure architecture are, what the economics are of your delivery model. You look at security, you look at compliance, you look at networking. There's a lot of things that you need to look at to make that evaluation of where cloud makes sense for you and where it doesn't make sense.
So that being said, Peter, how should you go about determining, what should I put in the cloud, or what should I virtualize, and what shouldn't I?
That's a big question. You know what? So I'll tell you, one of the benefits I've had in the last year is I travel around with a lot of enterprises, and I get involved in the early stages of them building their own private clouds, because ultimately this is one of the new trends that's happening. We've moved to the shift where internal IT has gotten with the ball and decided this is something that I need to do for my end users, because for the most part, my guys are already using the cloud. And in fact, there's a number of studies out there that talks about the massive growth that we've seen in Amazon, and the reality is that that's directly relational to the fact that expenses for books has gone up significantly inside of organizations. And that's because there's this shadow IT where developers and users are going outside of corporate IT and placing things on the public cloud. So the number one thing that we've found for many of our users that want to take control over their cloud implementation is to start with where their users are and actually take a look at what their users are already doing out on the public cloud. That's generally a great starting point, because in many cases it helps them control costs, control the sprawl, apply infrastructure services that relate directly to what people are using. You don't build a cloud just to build a cloud. You find a very specific use case, and it's great to start where people are today. And that's driven a significant amount of the successes that we've seen with regards to the implementation of Cloud Stack across various enterprises.
Mike?
I just want to add one other just data point of reference. So I work for IBM. A couple of years ago, we were asking ourselves, just like many of you, where can we take advantage of cloud inside of IBM? And our CIO's office went and looked at all the different applications. I mean, we're a huge company, right? And I think they found, I can't remember the exact number, 10,000 different applications across all the IBM IT organizations. And they did analysis and they said, you know what, out of those 10,000, at that point in time, maybe 1,000 were viable for the cloud. Over time, more of those would be, but just give you a perspective on, what scope of things might make sense at this point for your business as well.
So I've seen, so there are three drivers primarily for cloud adoption, right, that we've seen. One is in terms of time to market, like instant provisioning of infrastructure, something that could take weeks to go through a procurement cycle, et cetera, and provisioning now can be done within maybe minutes or hours, if not a couple of days. So that's one. The other one is around TCO, especially when it comes to elastic workloads. So if you don't know how much infrastructure you need to provision, maybe a week from now, maybe a month from now, then cloud is a great deployment bed for apps and workloads like this. And then the third one is around really providing elastic scalability, right? So if your app needs to scale or fail over time, the cloud actually supports that, and it offers it on at least the public cloud offers it on a pay-as-you-go kind of a model. So you don't need to earmark a huge amount of CapEx dollars in terms of provisioning infrastructure for workloads that are small but likely to grow over time.
So Kieran mentioned the idea of shadow IT, which certainly isn't anything new for the enterprise IT groups to have to deal with. It's something that they've been dealing with for a long time. But the fact is the siloed nature of the enterprise and the way that they do tend to adopt different IT, and in this case cloud-based products and services, is a challenge. How big of an issue really does fragmentation within the enterprise become? And more importantly, how do you overcome that?
It's huge. It's just huge. I was telling Eric about this before, so I'll shorten it for you. We have a couple of open positions on our team, and one of the jobs is as a data center analyst. So we're interviewing some people for it, and one of the candidates worked for a financial services firm. Well, we like financial acumen at our company for understandable reasons, and so we asked him about his familiarity with the purpose of income statements, balance sheets, and cash flow statements, and he couldn't tell us. He worked for a brokerage firm. He didn't understand the nature of his business. He didn't understand the levers related to finances. That is what we're talking about. Every single IT shop has to understand the industry they operate in and the particular levers that make their companies run faster or come to a screeching halt.
So one of the things with regards to fragmentation, fragmentation for me always sounds like a bad word. I actually think of it more as a model for adoption. And one of the things that's happened in the last decade is the emergence of low-cost solutions has driven individuals to adopt technology faster than a corporation adopts technologies. We saw this in Linux. Right? Linux started off in the service providers, then it became free for lines of businesses to start with their Quake servers. Next thing you know, it was print servers, file servers, app servers, Sun, IBM, and everybody else drops their Unix. Right? That was basically the wildfire growth that we saw with Linux. The same thing is happening with the cloud. The cloud being nothing more than swiping a credit card and starting to gain access to infrastructure for many developers was the initial step into the enterprise, right? And add to that the fact that many of the leading cloud solutions out there today are open source, are coming from small to medium businesses. They are things like OpenStack or CloudStack that make it approachable and a method of engagement for lines of businesses outside of IT. And it forces them to start looking at new ways of developing, deploying, and running their own services within the environment. We've got a number of companies. I'll tell you a great example, a large entertainment company out of Los Angeles that sells hats with very big ears. They are a classic IT shop. They run the gamut of big supercomputers. They have all kinds of classic proprietary gear. And when one of the divisions specifically focused on online services decided that IT either moved too slow or the internal cost of running these things were too high, but they recognized they couldn't use the public cloud, they went and downloaded literally all 4 of the open source cloud platforms out in the marketplace. They ran it in a closet. It was nothing more than a skunkworks team of 3 developers. Well, those 3 developers turned into a division of 50 developers. Today, they're running over 500 servers and not running dev tests, but actually running production environments that are driving revenue for the company on top of a private cloud that they built. It wasn't until they hit that production level and revenue started coming in that IT engaged. And when IT engaged, it wasn't a matter of, you did this on your own, we're now taking over, you can't do that. It was an assimilation, bringing them in, understanding how it fit within the requirement, applying policies to it that enabled them to maintain the agility and the growth, but learning with the line of business as they were coming online. That's actually a great thing that we're starting to see with regards to cloud adoption. Unlike Linux, where it was met with a stiff arm, and 10 years later, enterprises found themselves with 15 different variants of Linux, no unified patch levels, and absolute misery from a change control perspective. They're now engaging with their lines of business and understanding how are they using cloud and how can they get in front of this massive wave that's coming, because they see it in the same way that they saw themselves get completely run over in the early Linux days.
I think what we see is the most successful cloud deployments and customer satisfaction is where the relationship between IT and the business is strong to begin with. Something that you just said was, IT didn't engage until way down the road when there's already 50 servers in place or something of that nature. Basically, if IT doesn't know what's going on in the business units, in a large enterprise, it's a big challenge. Even in small companies, IT is more of a I'll call you when it's broke kind of organization, right? But if they understand what business is happening, they can basically educate the users in the business units what's available for them today. I would say a significant portion of the shadow IT and the cloud services where users and groups are going to sign up for things on their own using credit cards or even free services is simply because they never asked to begin with, is this available? There might be an existing investment that isn't even being used today because they didn't know about it. So IT, if they're not proactive and building that relationship with the business, cloud services and cloud solutions that they provide to employees aren't going to be any more successful than what's internal. So that relationship's super critical. And you don't have to be the expert, but they just need to be engaged.
Everybody needs to be in business development.
If they're not engaged, it's a big challenge.
So just to highlight one example, so we're seeing a type of application or workload where people want to share data either between teams or between desktop and mobile devices, etc. So it's a classic example of something where shadow IT it gets deployed in the BU first, and then IT wakes up and comes and addresses it. And what we're seeing is there are being solutions that are being built to address this challenge where they give more control and governance to IT. It's still a cloud-based solution, but something where IT can involve and actually drive more control. So we are seeing that shift from shadow IT towards centralized IT becoming more involved with the BU as and when these solutions mushroom within the organization.
The question still remains, though. You've got various business units or even smaller work groups within the enterprise, whether it's using something as simple as Dropbox for some storage capacity, or you've got some developers using some compute capabilities in the cloud for testing new applications, or something even more complex. As IT tries to become more engaged, how do they go about ensuring that all of those different business units not only sort of report back to IT, but are doing whatever they are doing in the cloud in a compliant fashion?
Well, I think that this is not about an issue of power or control, right? It's more about understanding, being very understanding from IT out to the business units about what their needs. I think it was mentioned before, right? As an anecdote, a story of our own, when we were thinking on acquiring WebEx over 8 years ago, I went to visit them at the headquarters, and I found a big sign on the sales floor that says, IT equals death. Because at the time, we had a lot of, this is what I mean, right? WebEx was selling a lot to individual departments because it was easy to get a credit card out and get, a conference and servers charged to you without asking anybody. It's not that they didn't need it as a company. It's just because they didn't know or had a service provided by IT to them and never went to ask them if they need them. They went for it. So if you, as IT, my recommendation would be, and this is coming from somebody that has been working on an IT shop for a long time too, is be proactive, right? If you see somebody using Dropbox or Box.net or whatever, right, figure out if there are more people, not only that little department, that they need that service. And most likely you will find that they do need that. And once you figure that out, you can put together a strategy to cover the company where people can realize the benefits of all these applications that come from the cloud. Together as a company, you will get better prices, better rates, better everything, right? So departmentalization for me is not something that needs to be fought. It needs to be understood and then acted upon. Right? And that will bring back to IT what we need as IT professionals is that sense of control, of everything that we are responsible for.
I'd almost go back to your point. It's not that everybody in the business needs to be in business development. It's that everybody needs to be a product manager if you're in IT, because IT has now become a service center. And the reality is your users are not ones to be controlled. Your users are ones you need to understand. And they'll tell you exactly what they need. And the reality is, many of them, there's this concept of positive intent. They're not going to use Box or Dropbox or any of these other tools because they want to screw you or because they want to get out from under your control, but because you don't have it. And it helps them do their job better. It helps them, it helps them on a day-to-day basis become more efficient for you as a business. So I think the role of IT at that point needs to understand better what are the things that your users are using and how can you adopt strategies that either embrace those public services or, where applicable, because of things like compliance, you bring in-house and you model that operationally inside the company to give them the same experience. Because if you can't do that, then the same thing that happens with BYOD really comes down to becoming BYOIT, right? S-H-I-T.
Lisa.
What we're really talking about, I think, is what it means to be in IT is changing, and we have to all sort of get on board with it. We're no longer taking care of infrastructure. We are technology scouts. We are people who understand where our industries are going, where our customer groups, what they need to do, and help find solutions. And then help procure those solutions in a way that makes good business sense, that aligns with overall strategic policy and direction. But the concept of owning and operating and maintaining infrastructure or applications as we had years ago is gone. And to be successful in this new world, you need some new skills.
To that point, how many in here are in the IT side of the house versus the line of business side of the house?
Okay.
So I would challenge you from a cloud perspective. This is the opportunity to change IT from IT equals hell, was that what you said? To IT as a competitive weapon. Because ultimately that's what's happening with regards to the cloud. Identifying ways to become more agile as a business, to create more opportunity for low-cost investment with high impact to the customer. And that's all going to happen with regards to how you leverage the various tools that are available to you from an IT shop. And some of those fit extremely well within a cloud service, whether it's public or private. And I think every time I've engaged with the IT side of the house, when talking about their deployments of cloud, they talk about the same thing. We are moving up level by implementing self-service and automation and all these efficiencies at the remedial mundane tasks. I'm no longer spending my time tracking down how I turn on a certain app and deliver it to my user, but I actually focus on higher level orders within the business that make IT very strategic and important to the success of the business.
And frankly, a lot more fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the beauties. It's one of the beauties of the cloud is that, some of those early, those more widely adopted, applications in, software as a service. If you make a decision to do that, the faster you move those, the more time you have to spend with the business units. The one thing I hear all the time is that, how can we do that? We don't have the time to do that because we're too busy managing servers. And so, if you can flip that and say, hey, take some of that workload off. They're the less risky, more obvious solutions to spend the time with the business units on addressing their needs, and building that rapport and that relationship. Again, super critical. They're just more successful overall.
So assuming IT is able to become more engaged and listen to the needs of the different business units, theoretically that's going to mean that the different various business units within an organization are going to effectively ask for everything to be up in the cloud. I know, Mike, you started on this discussion earlier on, and I think it's probably a great note for us to finish on then as we talk about what the different business unit needs are and how IT needs to interact with them. Does that mean that everything is eventually going to end up in the cloud?
Whether it's in the cloud or on-premise, it's not about the business unit wanting it in the cloud. What they want is a solution to the problem. So understanding the problem first is the first step. And so, can the cloud deliver it faster to deliver that agility to the business, to be able to close more sales or what have you? faster. That's really what it is. It's the solution, right? So it could be on-premise or in the cloud or a hybrid, but just understanding the need and coming up with a solution faster is really the key.
I mean, I think right now, cloud is serving as a catalyst for the lines of business to ask IT, how can you do this better? And where does cloud fit into this? There's an assumption that there's value in cloud, whether it's exclusively cost savings or whether it's more agility and innovation in the business. But they're coming to IT saying, where does cloud fit in the picture? So it's important for IT to have a point of view on this.
So this goes back to the point that we talk to our enterprises. It's about IT as a service, and just because it's as a service doesn't mean it's cloud. It's identifying opportunities to automate, streamline, and introduce self-service into your workflow or your process engineering. And one of the things to think about as you do that, the constant risk we always hear is, I don't want to give up self-service because of the fact that someone's going to go do something crazy like put a web server on a mainframe, right? So it's web server performance running on mainframe type costs. It works, yes, the cost model doesn't necessarily fit. The tools that we've seen launched in the last decade, right? Whether they are the config and automation tools like Chef and Puppet, to some of the new cloud services that we see, whether it's infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, these help IT define the policies and drive an automated data center with an API, if you will. Right? And ultimately, that's actually what your users are really coming at, whether it's they want the end software or they want a platform. They want the automation and the ability to engage with IT on those services, and they want to minimize the time and cost associated with doing that. All of the tools are there to enable you to deliver these by policy, by placement, and by workload, so that you control the costs and the underlying stuff, because at the end of the day, your users don't care what it's running on. They just know that they want this specific service.
And we tend to think that when we say cloud, is because we're going to send something out somewhere else, right? Cloud is not a place, right? It's a delivery model, a deployment model. There are perfectly good examples where private cloud are really great to achieve your objectives as a company, particularly if you are a highly regulated industry, government, financial services, things like that, where the deployment model is what brings the value, not necessarily the place where you put it, right? So just don't think that cloud essentially means that I'm going to give it up to somebody else, right?
Kieran?
Yeah, to answer your question, I don't think all workloads, all applications will move, everything will move to the cloud, right? What I envision is, what we envision is there'll be a continuum. There'll be some applications that'll extend into the cloud. Others will migrate for the benefits that cloud offers, and then some will continue to run on traditional infrastructure that companies have invested in. I think our job as cloud service providers is to kind of help the customer provide seamless transitions between those different form factors, whether it's cloud or mainstream traditional infrastructure, and to provide portability between. And that's something that HP is investing in terms of essentially a converged cloud vision.
So I see we're getting close to the end of our time. Before we wrap up here, first of all, I want to thank our fantastic panelists. If you guys don't believe how great you were, check out the steady stream of tweets talking about all your comments behind you. Go do a search for hashtag ITExpo later tonight, and you'll see all those great tweets. For everybody out there, obviously we've got the exhibit hall coming up in just a few minutes. Join us here tomorrow morning. We've got a great panel session called The Age of Acceleration at 9 o'clock, followed by a keynote presentation from GenBand, and then another panel, The Future of Service Providers, at 10 o'clock. So again, thank you so much for joining us. If you have questions for our panelists, we'll be up here for a few more minutes.